Hello everybody, this is the iFan channel here, and this is a bonus vlog of me reviewing the Citroen C4 I rented out for the day. The reason why I wanted to rent out the C4 is because I wanted to see what Germany's Autobahn looks like and drive around the Autobahn to two different cities, Leipzig and Dresden. And the reason why I'm not planning to keep the car for the entire trip but only for one day is because trains and buses in Europe are quite reliable, and in many cases they're even faster than driving, and they're far cheaper. You don't have to worry about the $7 per gallon fuel or parking or anything. And bus and train rates for the entire trip, based on my calculations, is much cheaper than the rent alone, let alone the petrol and parking prices. Now here you go guys, this is the exterior styling of the car. As you can see, you probably have not even seen this car style in the US yet. And I believe this is probably a lifted saloon, kind of like the Toyota Crown, but it is of course smaller. This car does not have a power tailgate, it has a manually lifted tailgate, as you can see. To close, this is how you close it. And as you may tell, this car does have keyless entry. I'm now quite far from the car and I'm not pressing the key. I'm going to slowly walk to the car. As you can see, there's actually keyless entry in this car. And just like many modern cars, this car does have keyless start. This car does have a fully digital gauge cluster, yet the gauge cluster is only about 5.5 inches, and it shows you the speed limits, what drive mode you are on, whether or not you're in park or reverse, and this, and of course the odometer and your fuel range remaining. Now the car does have a 10-inch infotainment screen, and as you can see, there's actually a 360 camera, which is quite unusual for a car between $25,000 to $30,000. I'm not really sure of the price because I'm not sure of the trim level, but I do predict it's going to be around $25,000 to $30,000 if they were to sell this car in the US. And of course there's the usual safety features, including blind spot monitoring and adaptive cruise control. And as you can tell, there are actually two front USB ports. This is a USB-C port and this is a USB-A port. And of course there's actually a rear USB port for rear passengers. Even though this does not have rear climate controls, there are actually rear climate vents, even though this is quite a small SUV-ish car. Now, even though some people would find this feature very annoying, you do control the climate settings in the infotainment screen, which could be dangerous when you're driving. And of course the infotainment system, even though it's a 10-inch screen, it does basically all the basic tasks, including radio, music, phone, navigation, climate controls, because climate is actually integrated into the infotainment screen, and you could change the vehicle settings, and you could actually connect to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but for some reason I could not get it to work. But I do believe this car does support these two features. And of course, other than a 360 camera, blind spot monitoring and adaptive cruise control, there are a lot of safety features. I drove this car for around 5-6 hours and I found a lot. This car has attention assist, I believe so, because several times I was not holding the steering wheel and I was only holding it with one hand. The car actually told me to hold the steering wheel if they see I'm not like focusing enough. And of course the parking sensors and park assist. As you can tell, those are the sounds for park assist, by the way. And those are parking sensors that actually create that sound. As you can tell guys, just like most modern cars, this car does have an electronic parking brake rather than a handbrake or foot mounted brake. And even though this car does have a lot of tech features, this car still has manual seats. As you can tell, this is actually the driver's side. And of course the same goes with the passenger seats. Now, since I do not have an owner's manual, some of my information would end up being wrong for this car, but this car is 2 years old and I did find a VIN number. And here it is. Based on my research, this car does have a 1.2 liter 3-cylinder PureTech, which does 130 horsepower. Yes, 3 cylinders. It is an 8-speed automatic and it does use petrol instead of diesel, this specific car. 0 to 60 is somewhere around 10 seconds, I believe so. Okay guys, now it's the time for me to tell you guys a story of my driving experience of this car yesterday, driving from Berlin all the way to Leipzig, then Dresden, and then back to Berlin again. The driving experience is surprisingly good for an SUV. The steering is, however, quite light, but even at high speeds at around 170-180 kilometers an hour on the Autobahn, this car still handles really well, which is surprising for an SUV. But based on the dimensions, this car could barely be considered an SUV. This car is only around 60 inches tall, which is shorter than many SUVs and only slightly taller than several saloons like the Camry and Corolla and Accord and Civic. Now, even though this car does have a higher driving profile and of course some cladding to prove its SUV-ish position, I do believe this car is maybe a hatchback-like car because of its height. Now, of course, this car is absolutely no ultimate driving machine with its 3-cylinder 1.2 liters, but it does handle incredibly well and it could achieve a top speed of around 200 kilometers an hour because yesterday I did achieve a top speed of around 195 to 200, maybe around 198 or 199. And this car is quite fuel efficient. I did not even have to fill up yesterday and I could drive from Berlin to Leipzig to Dresden and back to Berlin and still have a lot of fuel remaining. Around 100 kilometers or 120 kilometers of fuel remaining, which is impressive. Here is the conclusion. I do believe this car is a really good buy for $25,000 to $30,000, depending on how much it is. I'm not sure of the trim level. It is a really good car and it does have a lot of safety features and a lot of tech features, but it does lack some luxury features, by the way. I do think it's a really good car. And since Doug DeMuro does not review the car, why not? I decided to give it a DougScore for the car. As for the styling, I do think the car is quite cool. It is sort of weird because you don't see this car style really in the US, but some people might think it's ugly, so I would sacrifice and give it a 5 out of 10. For acceleration, I would give it a 1 out of 10 because this car does 0 to 100 in around 10 seconds, or in US 0 to 60. As for handling, this car does handle really well. I drove at around 170 to 180 kilometers per hour on the Autobahn, and this car does seem to handle really well. I would give it a 4 out of 10. As for fun factor, this car is not particularly fun to drive. It is just a regular boring crossover or hatchback car. But since this car is not sold in the US, if this car were to be driven in the US, it does have some appeal of you being the only person driving the car, so I would give it a 2 out of 10, and for cool factor, 3 out of 10, since this car is not sold in the US, but in Europe, it will be a 1 out of 10. As for features, I would give this car a 6 out of 10, since even though it does lack some luxury features, it does have a 360 camera and a digital gauge cluster and a lot of creature comforts. As for comfort, this is of course no luxury car, but since I'm about 5'7", I was able to ride this car very comfortably for 5.5 hours driving through Leipzig and Dresden before return to Berlin, so I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. As for quality, I do think the car's materials are quite good. The car's interior does look good, but I'm not sure about long-term reliability. but assuming it is average in Europe, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Practicality, since this car does store a lot of cargo, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. And of course, there's value. This car, I do believe, is around $25,000 to $30,000 if it were to be sold in the US, so I would give it a 7 out of 10 because there are actually a lot of features, but I'm not sure what the reliability is like because this car's not sold in the US. If you were to add up the totals, guys, the final score will end up being 48, which is quite okay for a car like this. Here is the conclusion. After reviewing the car, I did take the car to the petrol station to actually refuel before returning the car to 6T in Berlin. And as you can see, I did drive 350 miles approximately. It cost me 70 euros or 40 liters of petrol because each liter is 1.75 euros, which is about $7 per gallon at the time. And if you were to translate it, it's around 10.57 gallons. And if you were to divide the number of miles to the number of gallons, you find out even with 100 to 105 miles per hour drive constantly on the Autobahn, that's the average speed I did on the Autobahn, is between 160 and 170 kilometers an hour. I still maintained 30 miles per gallon, which meant this car still has impressive fuel economy even after extremely fast driving on the Autobahn. Basically about half my commute is on the unrestricted speed limit Autobahn, which is quite impressive. 30 miles per gallon, and even with extremely fast driving, 160, 170, even up to 180 kilometers an hour, this car still does impressively in terms of road noise, as the car is quite quiet even after this fast. My Toyota cannot even manage this fast and still be this quiet. At 80 miles per hour, the car ends up being extremely loud and unbearable. Basically, this car, the Citroen C4, is actually quite impressive with road noise. So thank you guys for watching. Please give a big thumbs up, subscribe for more videos. I'll see you guys soon.